Hello, friends, and welcome to Mousterpiece Melodies, a podcast that listens to the songs of Disney movies past and present. I'm Josh Spiegel.
And I'm Scott Renshaw. Thanks for joining us on this comprehensive and encyclopedic compendium of all things Disney music. Now playing Cinderella.
Before we get into our discussion, thank you for listening. No matter how you're checking us out, we hope you like what you're hearing. And if you are, we'd appreciate it if you could take a minute to rate and review Mousterpiece Melodies on iTunes, Spotify, or whatever app you're using to listen.
That's right. Let everyone you know how much you love the show, and tell your friends to do the same. Of course, you can follow me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw, and you can read my film criticism at cityweekly.net.
And you can follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece and email me at mousterpiececinema@gmail.com with any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share. Now, that's the regular housekeeping. It's out of the way. I did briefly want to, though, talk one-time bit of housekeeping here, since for our most dedicated listeners, I just wanted to, first of all, acknowledge we're back. We're back, baby. Podcasting once again, reunited, and it feels so good. If you are a longtime listener, you know that we had, when we started this show back in March of 2025, were any of us ever that young, we acknowledged that we were always going to have kind of a 6-week or so hiatus between our little seasons, basically 11-episode seasons. Then we'd have a bit of a break. And this hiatus went a little longer than expected for 2 reasons. One of them is that I have had some personal family stuff going on that continues to go on, but such is life. The other thing, well, I don't know if you heard, but the Walt Disney Company made some news in the last few weeks. They decided to initially make a very cowardly, craven decision to suspend Jimmy Kimmel, the late night talk show host on ABC, because he said some things that made a mean old bully who acts like, walks like, talks like a white supremacist, made him and all of his friends mad. So they kicked Jimmy Kimmel to the curb for 5 whole days, by the way. It obviously was not a very long suspension. But in that period of 5 days, full transparency, Scott reached out to me separately and was like, hey, I don't know how comfortable I am doing a podcast about the Walt Disney Company, one specific subsection of the Walt Disney Company, when another subsection of the Walt Disney Company is saying, free speech, what's that? We don't live in America. That would be crazy talk to allow comedians to say things that might annoy some people. Now, in the same spirit of full transparency, I think I may have, Scott, used the phrase perhaps naive. I was perhaps naive that Disney was going to make a firmer decision one way or the other. They suspended him, but I had thought to myself, my familiarity with corporate America being what it is, I was like, I kind of feel like Disney is going to realize that they're losing a lot of money. And even if they want to placate a very mean old man, they also don't like losing money. And so I think a couple days after you and I spoke, when we had said, we'll take a few days, we'll take kind of a week off beyond our planned hiatus. We'll see where things are. Disney very quickly undid their decision. Jimmy Kimmel ended up being the big winner in all of this, by the way, because he got the best ratings of his entire career.
Yep.
And the highest watched YouTube clip ever. That's how I watched his big return, because I don't have cable anymore. I don't have broadcast anymore. I'm a millennial. What are those things?
and I'm in a market with a Nexstar affiliate, so we didn't get it either.
Yes. Nexstar and I think Sinclair were the 2 affiliate groups that said, no, we don't like this not remotely inflammatory remark that you made about the horrific assassination of another person who acted like, walked like, talked like a white supremacist. Both of those things can be true, by the way. As Scott always likes to say, 2 things in opposition to each other can be true. You can think that the assassination was horrific because it was, no matter who the person is. But you could also think that the person was maybe not so great. It's okay to think those things in the same brain. I promise you can do it. But anyway, we are back now. That's the good news. Scott, I don't know if you wanted to add anything from your perspective of all of this yourself.
Not particularly, except that I know that it's going to continue to be challenging, and I still have my 1-year full Disney Plus subscription expires in November, and I'm still trying to figure out what I'm going to do at that point. And so that's a whole other decision. But we understand if folks have more complicated feelings about the company than they might have a few weeks ago. So
that is very true. And my last word here before we transition into our conversation on the songs of Cinderella, I think the story that I want to read, it hasn't been published yet. There's been a little bit of what was the minute by minute experience for Jimmy Kimmel during this 5-day period. And that's obviously interesting, but the story I want to read is much bigger. It's really the arc of the Walt Disney Company from 2005 to now. Basically, when Michael Eisner stepped down, new leadership comes in, they almost immediately get bigger and more powerful. Disney buys Pixar and Marvel and Lucasfilm. You get the expansion of the theme parks. You get the MCU, the Star Wars sequels, the Disney Plus, the aforementioned Disney Plus becomes a huge thing in 2019. All the hideous, creatively hideous but financially successful live action and CG remakes of animated classics. Culminating in 2019, you've got things like Avengers Endgame, the Lion King remake, etc., Disney Plus, The Mandalorian, all this big stuff. The current CEO at that time steps down, new guy steps in, a couple of hiccups, and then COVID hits, and really the last 5 years is kind of the falling action to me, culminating in what we just saw happen with Jimmy Kimmel and how Disney showed their ass, essentially. And I don't know who's going to write that book. I can't wait to read it. It would have to be some big, deeply reported book a la Disney War by James B. Stewart. And also it'd be very fitting to have Michael Eisner be both the bookends, because as some reports have said, it was Michael Eisner's very public statements on Twitter about the Jimmy Kimmel thing that spurred Bob Iger to say, fine, okay, we'll reinstate him. So again, I don't know who would write that book, but I have an idea for the title, and it's really fitting, very brief title. It also really effectively sums up my reaction to the last few weeks of what Disney has been doing. It's the source of one of my favorite gifs of all time. It's a quote from one of the greatest TV shows of all time. Very straightforward. Not great, Bob. Moving on, let's talk about the songs of Cinderella, the 1950 animated film from Walt Disney Animation Studios, featuring the voices of Eileen Woods, Verna Felton, Jimmy McDonald, and many more. Or Eleanor Audley, who we're going to have to make sure to shout out here, since although she doesn't have any songs in the film, Eleanor Audley should be a Disney legend. That's not at all a hot take, but she absolutely should be. I promise you, if you don't know her name, you know her voice. She's the voice of Lady Tremaine, the evil stepmother in Cinderella. She's the voice of Maleficent. She's the voice of Madame Leota in The Haunted Mansion. But anyway, Cinderella is, as I'm sure many of you know, the story, the adaptation of the quintessential fairy tale about the hardworking young woman whose father marries very badly, has a very poor taste in women, I think we could safely say. The woman he marries after Cinderella's mother dies, she turns out to be a pretty unpleasant woman herself, along with her two children, Anastasia and Rosella. They basically make Cinderella become a scullery maid. They make her work for them. And only one day, with some luck and help from her fairy godmother, does Cinderella's wish that her heart makes become a dream come true. Now, Scott, you and I you're older than me, Scott, but neither of us was around in 1950 when this film premiered in theaters. Sure. So as we like to always start these conversations, what's your initial recollection of seeing Cinderella as a child?
With a lot of these, and again, because I grew up in the era before VHS, a lot of things I can recall from seeing either the original theatrical release, in the cases we already talked about of Robin Hood, or in theatrical re-release. And some of these I just don't remember. I mean, I remember pieces. I remember having seen bits of things before, but when I actually first sat down to watch, and this is, I think, especially true of these sort of 1950s to early 1960s era Disney stuff, that maybe it was on A Wonderful World of Disney episode, maybe it was some other time, but this is not one of those that was ever one that made an impression on me or that I remember seeing as a child. I'm sure the first time I actually saw it in its entirety, I was an adult already.
Wow. Okay. Very interesting. So I have a different experience, or at least I am told I have a different experience, because I forget if I mentioned as much on the old show. When I was a little boy who wanted to be a big boy, I am told that the first movie I ever saw in a theater was Cinderella, because its final theatrical re-release would have been in 1987 when I was 3. The first movie I remember seeing in theaters was a different Disney adjacent film that we're never going to talk about in full on this show, because the film is Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which doesn't really have songs in it, unless you want to call it Bob Hoskins' little musical thing near the end of the movie, but that's not that. That would be getting a little dicey with it. But my point is, that's my first movie-going memory, but that would have been a year after this was released in its final re-release. So I have what my parents have told me, right? This is the first movie we took you to see in the theater. I don't have any vivid recollection from when I was a kid, because I should also note, speaking about the VHS release, I look here online, I see that this movie's first VHS release and Laserdisc release was in October of 1988. So you would have been were you in college at that time? Were you already in college?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
So there's always the possibility that, maybe you saw it then or some point like that. It's interesting to hear that you didn't have it, because I'm also seeing that it was re-released in theaters in 1973 and in 1981. But yeah, so I have that vague recollection. The other thing is, I remember very vividly that the movie was, at least for press, I believe in 2013 or 2012. I'm verifying. In 2012, the film was re-released in a Blu-ray Diamond edition. You, I'm sure, remember very well, Scott, that there used to be a time when Disney was like Platinum Edition, Diamond Edition, whatever edition. For whatever reason, at least in Phoenix, they invited critics to a screening of the film on a Saturday morning with lots of families and kids. And I still don't recall offhand if it was the equivalent of, we just put the DVD into a projector and poof, here it is on a big movie screen. But I have that recollection as well. Outside of those, I don't have really distinctive memories of seeing this as a kid, but it's also the kind of movie where I'm sure that there were clips of this played on the Disney Channel when I was growing up, in their DTV thing where they would play, basically, it wasn't actually music videos, but it was the equivalent of, let's just carve out the musical sequences and post them, put them on TV. And it's one of those movies where the 6 songs in this film, I should note, there's only 6 of them, but they're all pretty, well, a few of them are pretty distinctive, pretty iconic. Ironically, the first one is not the most iconic of those 6, but it is worth talking about. I think we wanted to dive into that one because, like, broadly speaking, I think it's just, of the 6 songs, there's 3 of these where it's like, yeah, this is pretty top tier Disney for me. This is I think one thing when we started this show back in March, we started with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, not just because it's the original Disney animated film, but because it was around the same time as the remake of Snow White, which I'm sure you all remember and love dearly. Scott is looking for a fact checker.
I just had the good fortune of being on a fan convention panel where we were talking about Snow White, and my fellow panelists refused to even acknowledge that movie existed. So that conversation was very short.
That's fair. And I forget, by the way, Scott, did you actually get to talk to any super duper famous people at that? You had told me there were a couple of different options. I forget if that ended up happening.
I ended up shaking hands with Henry Winkler, but that was a couple of the other ones. I was going to do Marissa Tomei, and then she canceled. And I was on the short list for doing Annika Nani Rose, and then someone else ended up getting that gig. So, not everything works out as you wish, but hey, the Fonz gave me a handshake.
I was going to say, Henry Winkler is a national treasure. You're very lucky.
100%, and I can guarantee that from personal experience now.
Yes, I was going to say, it's funny. You say the Fonz, and I think, yes, I know he's the Fonz, but he's also Barry Zuckerhorn, and I forget the character's name, but from the HBO show Barry. Speaking of that name twice.
Oh yes, oh yes. That was one of the. Well, we won't get off on the tangent, but he was very happy for getting that character as late in his life as he did. So anyway.
Of course. Anyway, yeah. So the point is, we talked about Snow White, and I mentioned it because Cinderella was the next true princess movie from Walt Disney Animation Studios. And as I believe we talked about back in March, Snow White is an important film for Disney. It's really the template for so many other films that the studio would make. But that template was improved upon. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you I think Cinderella is my favorite princess movie. It is very much not. But I also think is a vast improvement over Snow White, including in the songs. Now, going track by track, the first song is one that appears in the opening credits itself. It is fittingly called Cinderella. And I'm trying to recall off the top of my head, and Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Is this the first of the, well, outside of the packaged films that would randomly have like a brief melody time, like a choral version of some random song that was meant to tie into the title? This is really the first true title song about one of the characters. Dumbo doesn't have that. Bambi has a song in the opening credits, but not a song called Bambi, for example. So this one stands out a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really just a palate cleanser. It's meant to kind of set the table. I think the most notable part of it to me, and possibly to you as well, is the solo performer in the middle of the song. Did you know who that is, or am I going to get to reveal that to you?
You are going to get to reveal that to me.
That would be Marni Nixon.
Oh.
Yes, Marni Nixon, who was a whopping 20 years old when this movie was premiered. She was born in February of 1930. And it's okay if you're out there thinking to yourself, Marni Nixon, who's that? Is she related to Richard Nixon? I don't think so. But what she is somebody whose voice you have almost certainly heard if you've seen 50s and 60s era musicals, because she was well known for dubbing over the voices of actresses like Natalie Wood in West Side Story, Audrey Hepburn in My Fair Lady, Deborah Carr in The King and I. Obviously a very talented singer, even if she was more well known for her voice than for her face. I believe she also, actually, I'm sorry, she does have a on-screen role as one of the nuns in The Sound of Music. She is one of the singers in Maria. But the point being, very well known. Like I say her name, and obviously, Scott, you know who I'm talking about immediately.
Sure. It's interesting to see, she's always described as a ghost singer, and that just seems like such a tragic way to describe someone who is clearly as iconic as she was.
Unquestionably. But she does have, there is a brief part of this song, which again is not very long. It's, I think, all told 90 seconds to a minute 45, because again, it only takes place over the opening credits. And although this is from the era when there were no closing credits in films, there's not a ton of credits in this movie to show. So it's a brief song. She has a solo in the middle of it. And I think what I like about the song the most, it's not my favorite song of the six. It's probably my least favorite song of the six, while I still think it's good. It has a nice kind of almost eerie, slightly haunting quality to the musical tone, to the voices, not just Marni Nixon as the soloist, but the chorus, the Judd Conlon chorus that performed this with her. And that kind of tracks with a couple of the other songs in this film. There's a couple other songs here that I think stand out because they have an almost unexpectedly haunting quality. And I say unexpected because, unlike, say, Sleeping Beauty, this is a much more straightforward, crowd-pleasing kind of movie. There aren't a ton of flights of fancy creatively, so the fact that some of the music has this, echoey, faraway quality is pleasantly unexpected, I would say. What are your thoughts on this opening song?
I mean, it's nice. I think we've talked before about the way I feel about these sort of choral voices of this era and how they don't work for me. I appreciate that there is actually a non-choral component to this, which allows, when you talk about palate cleanser, that allows a palate cleanser for me. But yeah, I mean, there's something about it that does sets a tone for the way that fairy tales could be both charming and a little bit dark. And this is a little bit of a diversion, but it's also interesting just because it's a title song to think about. I don't know that I'd ever really registered before watching it this time that they refer to the fact that she was named by her father, Cinderella, which seems like a bad choice. It kind of seems to doom her to this life. It's not like she had some other name and then she became a scullery maid and they had to give her a different designation because she was working in the cinders. No, she was born and raised Cinderella. So bad call, Dad, in addition to your bad call with second wives.
I think what we learned here, and even in this version where he doesn't have any screen time, any dialogue, her dad may have been well-meaning, but didn't make a lot of great choices. And I'm sorry, there's something about the way you were describing it now where I was hearing Bane from Dark Knight Rises. You think darkness is your ally. There's something, I don't know why. There's something about that.
I was born into it.
You merely adopted the dark. Oh boy, who doesn't love that movie? Anyway, I think it's, again, I don't know that there are a lot of great examples of these kinds of opening credits songs because they are often leaning heavily on a chorus. And in a way where, again, the quality, the far off echoey quality of this song is the kind where I don't know the first time I actually registered, oh, right, there's a song here. Like, if you had asked me when I was a younger man, like, what are the songs here? You're like, well, it starts with Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes. Instead of like, well,
yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and in fact, that there's the big three, of course, we will refer to, but even the work song is familiar enough because it sort of is part of the background of Disneyland so much,
Yes.
So there's things like that, but the Cinderella theme song is just so like, oh, that's here. Oh, all right.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Now, after that opening song, before we get to the second song, I did want to note something I don't know if I've ever really allowed to stick in my head before. There's a little bit of narration where we're getting kind of the setup here, including the mention of Lady Tremaine and, quote, her own two awkward daughters. That is how Anastasia and Drizella are first referred to, and I wrote in my notes, would we call them awkward? I don't know that awkward is the descriptor I would use for those characters, unless it's just meant to be they're not as attractive as she is. It's like,
yeah, it seems almost uncharacteristically
kind,
euphemistic for the time. Yes, they didn't refer to them as the ugly stepsisters, which is sort of the way most people growing up just knowing of the fairy tale. That's sort of the way that they're described. Oh, it's the ugly stepsisters. And the fact that it's sort of like the version of saying in the 21st century unhoused versus homeless. It's like you don't think that they're going to be that thoughtful at that particular time. So it was interesting.
Yes, very fair point. But again, after that narration, it only takes a few minutes for us to really kick in to the first of the big three songs, which is, of course, A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes. The idea being that while Cinderella has a very pathetic lot in life at the start of the film, she chooses to approach her life similar to Snow White. She doesn't have a very downbeat approach to her life. She tries to take every day as best as she can. And once she wakes up for her daily grind, she is greeted by a slew of woodland creatures, including the mice who are in, well, we'll get to the mice in a minute. Heard a lot of this, though. But we get this song where we hear Eileen Woods sing A Dream is a Wish Your Heart Makes. And, part of it, as I wrote in my notes, is it helps that Eileen Woods just has a much more pleasant voice than Adriana Caselotti. Because I think you could very easily argue, I think I would argue two things are true. The song, at least through its lyrics, are almost sickly sweet. They're almost going to give you, put you into a diabetic coma. And I realized this time around, it's like, even more than anything in Snow White, this song feels like the true source of how princesses are parodied in Shrek. Then again, it's not the first time that a Disney princess is surrounded by woodland creatures and is singing and frolicking around, but there's something about this one that feels a lot more specific to inspiring that parody. And all that said, Eileen Wood's voice is just so charming and so delightful to listen to that I think the song is extremely well done. It's a really solid animated sequence. Again, I don't know that a lot of I don't know how much of what's around the songs in this movie is as good as the songs themselves, but I do think this film's songs are pretty near the top for me of Disney music. What about you?
I agree, and I think that the voice is a lot of it. I really love her voice, and because there's a softness to it that I think that we are not necessarily. There's somewhere between that sort of operatic trill that Adriana Caselotti has and what became sort of the more Broadway belt version, and it's a very different kind of thing. And it's considering how, if Snow White sort of established a certain template, this is where we know, this is a template, because so much of what we see echoes. There are, it's the storybook that literally opens up, and it's the little animals frolicking around, and we get not just it's an I want song, it's an I wish song that that the princess gets. So, and the princess is in this sort of slightly diminished state with a step, all of these things there's so many echoes of Snow White in this that it feels like this is, let's just do another Snow White because that's going to be a hit too. But a lot of what it does, as I think you already said, does those things better. And I think that this is a much more engaging and satisfying I Wish song than I'm Wishing, and we get that sort of lead into to the rest of the story in a way that I think is just, it's much more pleasant to the ear and enjoyable to kind of want me to keep going on.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's an interesting, there's an interesting dichotomy here because, as we talked about last time with Snow White, the voice of Adriana Castellotti is a little bit nails on a chalkboard, depending on your personal preference. Eileen Woods is very much the opposite of that. In Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you not only have a movie whose title is very honest about the fact that it's really not just about Snow White. The Seven Dwarfs take a lot of focus as well, but they're not maybe annoying to hear or listen to. And now I must regrettably talk about the mice in this movie because I don't think when I was a kid they bothered me as much, but I can't stand the mice in this movie. And as I put in my notes, there's so much shit with the mice in this movie. Right?
There is, but I don't have that, and so here's what's an interesting thing. As we've already said, I don't have a kid memory of my own with this, but I have a memory of watching with my kids, and I think that may shape what I think about it now, because them watching, Gus and Jack, they were just so enchanted and thought they were so cute and wanted immediately to have little stuff. And I think that I find their engagement with them and how they want to help Cinderella so much, and they're just so, and everything that they do, it's all about helping her because she helped them, and it's just, I don't know, I do not have that problem. I find them very charming and I enjoy the mouse stuff, and I don't have a problem with it at all.
So this is where you're going to admit that you love Alvin and the Chipmunks, right? Because that's what I was thinking of a lot when I heard the mice here.
No, and it's not about the voice, and again,
but see, that's what it is for me.
It is odd because we've just been talking about an annoying voice, and I don't have that problem, because to me it's just mice doing a mouse voice, and it's not the same way that I think of. I mean, a little bit of Alvin and the Chipmunks, if you're listening to a novelty record, is not a problem, and I can understand listening to it over the course of a 70-minute movie is definitely different. But I just don't have that. I just don't have that experience of thinking that the voices, because I'm watching more than I'm listening when they're doing their thing, I guess.
That's fair. Although I do think it's interesting. You said you're kind of expecting a mouse voice as you're watching this, as you're hearing these characters. And on the one hand, I see your point. However, I'm sure the voice of, I believe it's Jacques, is Jimmy McDonald. That name, I'm sure, rings a bell, yes? Or am I going to reveal that one to you as well?
No. Actually, no.
So Jimmy McDonald was the official voice of Mickey Mouse from 1947 to 1976. He was already doing a mouse voice, and it did not sound like Jacques. That's my point. We already have the standard bearer for a mouse voice, and it's him. And I mean, I think part of it is the vocal quality is just a little annoying. And secondarily, it's just, there's a lot of those characters. I'm sure it was before this viewing, to be clear, where I realized, like, wow, Cinderella is kind of a supporting character in her own movie, which is, again, I think an interesting flaw of princess films of the era, because whenever we do talk about Sleeping Beauty, it is just as applicable by design of the plot that the main character is sleeping for a large portion of it. So there's some similarity there, but in this one especially, it's like, wow, she's in so little of this. And I should also note, before we move on from the mice for a little bit and we get to the next non-mouse song, the voice of Gus is Candy Candido, who you may know. He's been in a few other Disney films. He plays one of Maleficent's goons, one of their more deep-voiced goons in Sleeping Beauty. He's the voice of Fidget in The Great Mouse Detective. He is also in Peter Pan as the Indian chief. Again, not great, Bob. But before we get to the mice song, because they do actually have a song here, after the initial setup of learning about Cinderella's lot in life, we see the mice. Gus is a new mouse to the group, and they're all trying to teach Gus how things work. I will say, I put in my notes, I was told we don't talk about Bruno, so I was a little confused. I get a lot of mention of that character. And then after some back and forth where we see how cruel Lady Tremaine is and how nasty, how evil, or how awkward Anastasia and Drizella are, we get to hear the two of them start to sing, and mercifully Cinderella finishes off the second song in the film, Sing Sweet Nightingale. And this is about one of the only places outside of the opening credits and one other song where there's kind of a visual flight of fancy a little bit. The idea is that Anastasia and Drizella are practicing their singing to be as fetching young maidens as possible in town, and they have horrible singing voices. Cinderella hears the song, she kind of takes over, and we get to see her almost imagining herself in the different soap bubbles as she is scrubbing the floor of the house. Again, the song itself is not too challenging. Like it's not like a lengthy piece of music, but there's something about the visual quality of it that calls to mind, if not like a little bit of like Pink Elephants on Parade from Dumbo, that kind of the animators getting to push themselves and do something quirky in a film that is otherwise really not quirky at all. What are your thoughts on this song?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like what I was referring to with the mice. It's more interesting to look at than to listen to, and I think that that's one of the things that it's okay to have these little interstitial bits, and there's obviously a lot of incidental orchestral music in this, and in addition to the songs. But this feels almost like that. It's sort of a musical sequence where it's the background music is supposed to do the work of just kind of like setting a tone so we can watch something interesting unfold rather than listen to the song itself. And I think on that level it actually works really well because it's not asking you to pay attention to, it's not offering any sort of storytelling. And really that's what's interesting about thinking about the differences as we kind of move backwards, is that very little other than just sort of a very basic, it's establishing a certain kind of song. The songs, it's not the way it is in the Ashman-Menken era where they established the sort of Broadway template where the songs are part of the storytelling and you kind of need the lyrics. You need to understand what they are saying in order to, like, if you don't listen to Be Our Guest, you don't know how long it's been that the servants have been in their non-human forms. But
Right.
there's nothing like that in these. So this is fine that we have one of these songs that is completely background noise to something that's a little fun to watch.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And so around this period of the plot, in between after the real Kickstarter to the story is that the king of the kingdom in which they all live has decided to throw a ball. He wants his son, the Prince Charming, to have all the eligible young maidens in the kingdom attend this ball so that he will hopefully choose one of them to be his bride. And although Cinderella seems like the least likely one to get to attend because of all the work she has to do and the fact that Anastasia and Drizella and Lady Tremaine can't possibly imagine anybody looking at Cinderella and saying, well, she's the girl I want to marry. She is able to briefly have a bit of hope because Lady Tremaine says, hey, you do all your chores, all the 8 billion chores I've given you, you can definitely go to that ball. But of course, she would need to have a nice dress to do so, and that's where Jock, Gus, the other mice, and all the animals of the forest come in the work song. The idea being that they are going to make Cinderella's dress for her so that she can attend the ball that evening. Now, again, I think the work song is nice and bouncy. I think it's really good to know in the back of my head that it's not the only other bouncy, upbeat, well-paced song. We'll get to that one next. But this is, again, it's one of those where the rhythm is good, the music is fine. I will say one of the lyrics that has for a long time always stuck out to me as just, a product of the era, when I believe it's Jock who says, and I can do the sewing. And one of the female mice says, leave the sewing to the women. And it's like, okay. And again, I think the nicest way you could look at it is one of the female mice being like, you're going to screw it up. Let me make sure you don't screw it up. But I also think I'm being exceedingly charitable with that reading.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's 1950.
Yes, exactly. And the song is bouncy enough, but it goes back to what we were already talking about. The voices really annoyed me. And the same is true, by the way. There's technically reprises of a couple songs, including A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes, if the mice sing. And I literally said, it's like Alvin and the Chipmunks in my notes at that one. So I think those are the parts where it's just a little harder to get on board with that song, just because it's what we were talking about with Snow White back in March. If the voice is not pleasant to hear, it's a bit of an obstacle, at least for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of this song in general. What's interesting is, there are things that, as we've talked about many times, exist in your park and sort of in your brain in a Disney parks context. And this tune is, when you're sort of in the Fantasyland loop, I guess you'd say, you hear this, and it's like, oh, I forgot it had lyrics. I remembered the tune. I didn't even remember it was a song that had lyrics. And so when this starts playing, it's like, oh yeah, this is the song the song that goes like this, to use the Spamalot term. But it's something that I love this melody and this tune and have so many associations with it that I almost kind of tune out the lyrics. And so again, a weird, inconsistency on my part, I guess you'd say, but it's like, I don't really care as much because I kind of dig this tune, but it's not about the lyrics or the singing or I can let the music do all of the heavy lifting in this.
That's fair. I mean, again, I see that, and again, the music is definitely very familiar, and I think you could probably argue that the music to a lot of these songs, maybe not the main title song, a lot of them are pretty hard not to associate with theme parks, I would say. Mm-hmm. So after this song is over, the mice reveal to Cinderella the dress that they've made. She is, of course, delighted because while she had finished her chores, she kind of assumed she was SOL with the actual, fashion piece of the day. But things get very dark very quickly because once she comes downstairs to reveal her dressed up self to Anastasia, Drizella, and Tremaine, they are pretty insulting, pretty cruel about it. There's also, I forget if it's when Anastasia and Drizella start tearing the dress apart or beforehand when they mentioned beads, and I just thought of the line for the exchange from Arrested Development. Bees? Beads. Beads? Job's not on board. It's a good episode. Anyway, so the dress is ruined. Cinderella assumes her entire dreams are ruined as well, but after Anastasia and Drizella and Lady Tremaine leave for the ball and leave her in the dust, almost literally, Cinderella is crying. She's, really in a very bad spot until she is visited upon by her fairy godmother, voiced by Verna Felton, who, when we talk about Sleeping Beauty, we would talk about her because she plays one of the fairies in that film. She voices one of the very unpleasant elephants in Dumbo. She plays a different elephant in The Jungle Book. She was in a lot of Disney movies of the era. And this is basically her big moment because she gets to sing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo as she is getting Cinderella truly dolled up for the evening, with a much nicer dress, transforming some of the animals to help be her coachmen, to be the horses for her beautiful carriage, which is transformed out of a pumpkin. This is, if it isn't A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo is kind of the most iconic sequence in this film. And, it's obviously silly just by the title. It's one of those things where within the context of the movie, Verna Felton makes it sound perfectly natural, but you hear a grown man saying bibbidi bobbidi boo, and it just sounds a little dumb. And that's okay. It shouldn't
However,
Yes?
I will note as we get to our cover corner, I heard a grown man sing a version of this song that I dug a lot, so we'll get to that.
I heard a grown man sing a version of this song. Is that like I saw an elephant fly?
Yes.
But anyway, I really do think this is a great sequence overall. The song itself, like if you listen to the song on YouTube or on your phone or whatever, on record, CD, whatever, it sounds really good. But this is one of those where the visuals heighten the music in some way. The animation complements it so perfectly. There's a reason why this is a standout sequence, why the image of Cinderella transforming is one of those images that everybody associates with Disney animation. It's just absolutely perfect. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could add so much more to that. There's such a wonderful tradition of the nonsense song in Disney.
Mm,
We will talk about another one next week when we talk about Mary Poppins and Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious. And so there's times when you can just it almost reminds me of the anecdote I always put out every 21st of September about the writing of the song September and how Allie
mm.
Willis was just told, it doesn't matter if they're just saying body eye. It's like, don't get in the way of the groove. It's like, that is this song. It doesn't matter that I don't know what Salakabula, and it's just don't get in the way of the groove, and the groove is there, and the sequence itself is entertaining. Although it's not specifically song related, I just kind of wanted to back up to the tearing apart of the dress because,
Okay.
again, there are times when it's been a while. That's a really weirdly violent sequence, and it's
Mm.
really interesting how that is edited and cut. It almost feels like the psycho shower sequence, these quick jagged cuts to tear this, pull this, and the faces and the reactions, and there's something about that that's like, wow, they really went hard with this one, and so it's nice to have the follow up to that be this lovely and this entertaining and engaging, because it does really it has all of those pieces that you talk about from the sort of classic sequences. The images are really interesting on their own, and the music and the song, and so it's a really wonderful piece, and I think it works even better coming on the heels of what is probably the most violent bit in the movie.
Yes, it's the light after speaking of a different Dark Knight movie, the night is always darkest just before the dawn. The dress
Yes.
getting torn is the night, and it's darkest, and now we have the dawn. Yeah, I mean it's a really I agree that sequence is very traumatic in its own way for Cinderella. It may not be the most violent example of something horrifying happening to one of our characters, but it's the equivalent of Snow White in the forest. In Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs or something like that. But yeah, I mean, Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo is it's such a delightful sequence, so well done. And after the transformation is complete, Cinderella, even though she only has until midnight to make her dream come true, is off to the ball, where she very quickly encounters the charming Prince Charming, the blandly handsome Prince Charming. And although there are lots of other young women at this ball, he is almost instantly taken with this mysterious young maiden who Lady Tremaine thinks she might kind of sort of be able to recognize, but not completely immediately. And so Cinderella and Prince Charming go off into the night away from the rest of the crowd, where they dance together, and of course they fall in love. And while they fall in love, they are singing off screen, kind of sort of, the final song in this film. So This Is Love. Now, can I tell you, I should have mentioned much earlier, Scott, the theme of today's episode, which is talk show hosts. You know why that's
Yes.
the case for here? Yes.
I do indeed. And this is weird because I don't know a lot of these things, but as someone who grew up in the 1970s
Uh-huh.
and watched things like Merv Griffin and Dinah Shore show, we've already talked about Dinah Shore and watching her.
Yes.
But yes, I watched the Mike Douglas show, and I was
Yes.
familiar with Mike Douglas as a singer who was provided the singing voice for Prince Charming.
Yes, he does. So, Mike Douglas, if you're out there and you're too young and you're thinking, you mean the guy from the Ant-Man movies? First of all, how dare you? Second of all, no, I don't mean that Michael Douglas. This is Mike Douglas, who is an actor in the 50s, a singer, and would eventually host, I think for close to 2 decades, a daytime talk show called The Mike Douglas Show, a show that I learned won the first Emmy for individual achievement in daytime TV from the National Academy of TV Arts and Sciences. And it's not like you'd be able to tell. I don't know that I would have known his voice off the top of my head I forget when I first realized who this guy was within the context of this film and in broader TV, but like, oh, Mike Douglas, like I've heard of that name before. It's so odd and interesting since he is only, I believe, providing the singing voice for
Yes.
Prince Charming. The actor who is uncredited but speaks as Prince Charming is William Edward Fitz, which, okay, good for him. I guess he didn't have a good enough singing voice, that guy. Mike Douglas is the one who sings it. And it's also worth noting that So This Is Love belongs to a specific strain of Disney song. There are a couple of songs throughout Disney animation history that are like this. I'm thinking of, for example, Something There from Beauty and the Beast, where it's not just that your main, your love interests are singing. not so much to each other, but to themselves, and they're doing so through their thoughts. It's that you don't see Cinderella and Prince Charming sing "So This Is Love." It's over
Mhm.
they're dancing as they're kind of looking at each other, gazing into each other's eyes, and again, becoming very enamored with each other. It's a really lovely sequence. Again, a little bit of a haunting quality, a bit of an echoey, faraway quality, because it's not the two of them belting the song out, a la some big Broadway or love duet. I think this is, I don't know, I would call it underrated automatically, but this is maybe my second favorite song in the film. I think this is a
Mhm.
really solid piece of music. What do you think?
Yeah, there is also another song in this tradition that you're describing, one that we have already talked about
Ah,
very
yes.
recently.
Would that be Love from Robin Hood? Oh, I See
That
the Light from Tangled, right?
I see the light, exactly.
Yes.
So the we're falling in love with each other and we're thinking about that as it's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean I think, as we've talked about before, one of the reasons that I was interested in the idea of the cover corner was because it suggests whether the song itself is something interesting outside of the context of the movie. And I
Mm,
think that this is one which has lent itself to the most interesting or the most covers that it's like I would listen to that again because
mm.
it's just a really beautiful piece of music. Although what's really interesting is one of the reactions I had watching it this time was it reminded me of one of those songs that would appear in a Marx Brothers movie that as a kid I would be like, oh, they're doing the love song. Now it's like, can I, this is before when I'm just watching it on, broadcast TV. It's like I can't even fast forward through it. When do we get back to Harpo and Groucho? It's like it's one of the, even the quality of the voices. It just sounded like one of those vintage love ballads that. But it's a really beautiful song, and it's one that I think has. It, it's interesting that you don't find as many of the cover versions of it that are
Mm.
duets because it's so perfect as a duet that it's weird that more of them aren't. So yeah, I mean it's a really beautiful piece, and I do wish there was something more interesting going on visually within the context of this.
Mm.
I mean, it's an unfair comparison, but you think about the Beauty and the Beast ballroom sequence, and it's like that has so much more going on that works beyond just sort of like I'm just watching them dance.
Right.
So there is that a little bit. It's like, I mean, I wish there were a little bit more happening there, but it's a beautiful song.
No, it definitely is. And I will say I actually like the visuals that accompany the music. It's maybe not the most daring or like the boundary pushing, but there's something about it that I think kind of adds to a nearly epic style, a grandeur perhaps to that song that may not otherwise be there. And by the way,
That's
before
true, but I do think that because in this era there's just this assumption that because they've danced together they fall in love. There's nothing happening to suggest anything other than pretty girl, good looking guy. I guess they're falling in love. And so I guess I mean, that may be an anachronistic hope but this is something that it's like, can you give me something that suggests there's actually a connection between them? And, most of the shots are long shots of them.
Mm.
There's nothing, they're not even close ups of them looking into each other's eyes. So there are those kinds of choices which just suggest it wasn't really the primary goal to say, can we really show them falling in love here? It's just like, let's play a love song and that does all the work.
That's true. Now, before we get any further, there's one other vocal presence here that I didn't acknowledge, the narrator of this film. Do you know offhand who narrates the prologue of this movie, Scott? I know we're going
I
back, but
do
I promise.
I do not recall. No,
Well, that would be the actress Betty Lou Gerson. Does that name ring a bell to you?
it does indeed.
That would be, for those of you out there who don't know, that's the voice of Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians. That Betty Lou Gerson is the uncredited narrator here. I nearly forgot to mention that. And again, doesn't sing here, or I don't think she even sings in 101 Dalmatians. But it's a very weird tie-in considering that movie is a decade off in the distance. But anyway, so after So This Is Love, obviously Cinderella is in love with Prince Charming, but she also knows she only has until midnight and time is running out, so she dashes home. He is confused about why she's leaving, especially why she left one glass slipper behind. And she takes the other with her. Everything kind of falls apart right when she gets home. And although she's disappointed about that, she had such a wonderful evening, and the prince, being as in love as he is, has decided, well, this is the girl I'm going to marry, so we have to find out who she is. The Grand Duke has to try the shoe on every girl of the kingdom. And although this movie does have its dark moments, it's obviously not as dark as the fairy tale written by, I believe, Charles Perrault, because is it that the stepsisters like try to chop their toes off to get...
Yes.
Yeah. That doesn't happen here, in case you forgot. There's no amputation in this movie. Obviously, the slipper does not fit Anastasia and Drizella, and it's only when Lady Tremaine hears Cinderella humming the waltz from the ball that she realizes the girl she kind of sort of recognized, well, that was her stepdaughter, and so Lady Tremaine tries unsuccessfully to lock Cinderella up. Eventually, she comes downstairs. Yes, it's true the slipper that the Grand Duke had breaks, but as Cinderella says, I have the other slipper, leading to, I genuinely think, one of the best pieces of character animation in Disney history, the close-up of Lady Tremaine gasping, horrified that her plan has failed for good. A really great
kind of a meme, the sort of showing the kind of body acting of Eleanor Audley side by side with that. It's a great, go out and look for it if you do. You sort of see the reaction take that was sort of used as the model for that animation. It's a great piece.
I don't think I've seen that before. I will have to look that up. So after that, Cinderella and Prince Charming go off together. They're in love. Thus, we have the end of our film. Now, of course, we do get a reprise. Yes, we do. It's a very brief one, though. That's yes. The reprises that are here are so short as to be almost non-existent, I would say, and they're okay, but none of them really stand out, at least to me. I don't know about you.
No, it's okay.
So after this, I alluded to this much earlier in our discussion. There were plenty of live-action or live-action CG remakes, including the version from 2015 directed by Kenneth Artemis Fowl Branagh. Does anybody else remember Artemis Fowl? Because I haven't forgotten seeing that movie. Kenneth Branagh should apologize to me for that movie. That was terrible.
It was a time when sometimes all you could cover were the things that were being released on streaming services.
Yeah, it was a rough period, is what you're trying to say, I think. I would say, at least. Anyway, he did direct a version in 2015 starring Lily James as Cinderella, Richard Madden as the prince, Cate Blanchett as the evil stepmother, and Helena Bonham Carter as the fairy godmother. Now, for a number of reasons, I did not rewatch that film. I actually didn't even re-listen to the use of songs like A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes or Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo. I will tell you the one thing, I believe it is fair to say, you can tell me if you disagree. More than a decade later, I think the conventional wisdom is, yes, the live action or CG remakes suck, but Cinderella is maybe the least bad of them. It's one of the more easily praised remakes, I would say. I don't agree with it, but I think that is a common consensus I see online.
It is common, and I think part of it is that, at the time it came out, I was like, I did. And then you sort of see how much worse they get, and you're thinking, well, I mean, relatively speaking, yeah, so that's where the relatively speaking comes from. I still don't like it, but yes. I still think that the thing's gotten much worse as the years went by.
Yes, and it's funny, looking at the poster of it just now, I'm sure I said it about one of these movies, if not the Cinderella remake, of it's like if those Annie Leibovitz pictures of actors in Disney as Disney characters became a movie. And again, is that better than the remake of Lion King? Sure, because it's real people. But also that's a very, very low bar to clear. Now, we can shift into Cover Corner broadly. And Scott, I regret to inform you, I did not do my due diligence of research. So I leave it to you. What covers did you discover of these songs?
Well, in addition to I did go back just to listen. I listened to the Lily James version of A Dream Is a Wish, Your Heart Beats, and it's actually her version of So This Is Love is it's nice, and she doesn't have any kind of classical voice. It's not much that's demanded of her. It's sort of, it's fine. But there were a couple that were really good, and one that sticks with me just because, among the many compilations and cover versions. And do you remember who does a cover version of A Dream Is a Wish, Your Heart Makes on Simply Mad About the Mouse?
I don't. Please tell me it's not Michael Crawford.
No, it is Michael Bolton.
Oh, okay.
And It's Michael Bolton. If you've never heard this before, imagine Michael Bolton singing "A Dream Is a Wish Your Heart Makes,"
Hmm.
and that is what it is. It is that version, that belty Michael Bolton voice doing this, and so it's just not a good fit because he's giving this thing his like to the balcony all, and it's like this is just a gentle song, and it's not. I don't think that was really within his range at the time. But there were a couple of others that I thought were really interesting. There was a version from the Disney Descendants movies. I actually don't recall which specifically, with Brandy and Paolo Montalban doing the duet of "So This Is Love," which has a very kind of jazzy version of it that I think was really interesting. It just had a little different, musical component to it that makes it feel a little bit sultry, and it's like, oh, okay, we're going a little bit, swanky for this one. I dig this, but the best one to find, and it's interesting that in the course of having all of these other things that we've talked about, I did not know that there was a full Louis Armstrong Disney covers album.
Ooh.
And his Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo slaps. It absolutely slaps. So whatever you do, if you want to find yourself just a little smile today, go find Louis Armstrong on YouTube singing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, and it is just an absolute joy.
That seems like it would be a lot of fun. I could just hearing that combination. It's like, yep, I can immediately imagine what that would sound like. And I should clarify, since I regretfully can answer this question, the movie you're referring to with Brandy and Paolo Montalban is Descendants: The Rise of Red, the most recent entry in that franchise. Ooh, goody. I don't remember them singing it, but I have sat through most of that movie because my son has enjoyed those motion pictures. So anyway.
So those are the key ones. I think that if people want to find out some interesting ways that these songs have been interpreted,
there you go. Now I should also note before we wrap up here that the 1950 version of Cinderella was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, all of which were sound or music related. So it did not win anything. Nominations for Best Sound. Do you happen to know offhand what won for Best Sound before I tell you the other nominees?
In 1950, no.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the other 4 nominees. I'm going to let you guess, and I guarantee you're going to guess correctly. The other 4 nominees were a film called Trio, a film called Louisa, a film called Our Very Own, and a film called All About Eve.
Would it be the film called All About Eve?
It sure would. And by the way, an excellent film, All About Eve. Not a movie that I immediately think about, wow, what amazing sound it had. But they have to say all that dialogue, so of course it had good sound. The nominees for Best Score, now specifically for scoring of a musical picture, the other 4 nominees were Annie, Get Your Gun, I'll Get By, 3 Little Words, and The West Point Story. Which of those do you think beats Cinderella?
Just go ahead.
I would have said again, obvious answer is correct. The answer is Annie, Get Your Gun.
Okay.
The musical adaptation. And finally, the nominees for Best Original Song. Aside from Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo from Cinderella, there is a song called Mona Lisa from Captain Carey, USA. A song called Mule Train from Singing Guns. Be My Love from The Toast of New Orleans. And Wilhelmina from Wabash Avenue.
Now, this is the only one that I actually did look up previously, and I would have to say this was the right choice because Mona Lisa is an absolutely stunning song, and not just because, mostly because Nat King Cole sings it, and it's sort of when I think of Nat King Cole, and it's not the Christmas songs which I grew up with, it's singing Mona Lisa.
See, that's interesting. So, it's funny. I've almost certainly heard this song because I know at some point I've seen the British film Mona Lisa starring Bob Hoskins, the aforementioned Bob Hoskins, and that song appears there. I also see from Wikipedia that this song is in the climax of Glass Onion. And I've seen Glass Onion a few times, so I know this song, but it's funny. When I think of Nat King Cole and not Christmas songs, I think of his version of Stardust, which is featured in Sleepless in Seattle and is an absolutely beautiful piece of music.
Mona Lisa, men have named you.
Okay, that sounds a little familiar. Okay. And yes, obviously Nat King Cole versus Verna Felton. I get why Nat King Cole is.
Yes.
Now, that said, I have never heard of the film Captain Carey USA. It is a crime thriller starring Alan Ladd, who would be Shane a year later, and Alan Ladd, who features in a Disney film from the early 1940s that we're never going to talk about in this show, Scott. Do you know what movie that is? Because I know it off the top of my head.
No.
That movie is The Reluctant Dragon. He appeared as a Disney animator in The Reluctant Dragon a handful of years before he became a bigger name actor. But it is a little interesting, as I think we've talked about, the number of Disney films that did not win for their music, but you can think to yourself, there's a couple here that could have gotten nominated. Yeah. But yes, I do see how Mona Lisa would have won. Now, all that said, I don't think I had anything else to talk about with Cinderella, Scott. So unless you had anything else you wanted to discuss here, we can probably close things up.
Let's do that. So with that, it's time to turn down the volume on Mousterpiece Melodies. What's on the playlist for our next episode? As previously mentioned, Mary Poppins. And while you wait, make sure you subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you download your podcasts.
And of course, we'd love for you to listen along and tell us what you think. Do you love the songs of Cinderella? Do you hate them? I can't hate them? Come on. Even I don't hate the work song, and I don't like the mice in this movie. If you've got any comments, questions, or opinions you'd like to share, you can reach me at masterpiececinema@gmail.com. You can follow me on Blue Sky at Mousterpiece. I also wanted to call out in terms of my own upcoming work. I hope that all of our listeners out there are subscribers to the Episodic Medium newsletter, the TV newsletter that I contribute to with overseen by a friend of the show and past guest Miles McNutt, because my latest assignment is going to be starting the Sunday after this episode goes up. This episode's going to be going up on Monday, October 6th, and Sunday, October 12th will be the return of two CBS procedurals. They're going to be airing after football that night. The shows in question are Elsbeth, the Good Wife spinoff starring Carrie Preston, and Matlock starring Kathy Bates. I am very excited to be covering these shows, and if you had told me 5 or 10 years ago, Josh, you're going to be excited to cover a show called Matlock. It's a reboot of Matlock starring Kathy Bates, and you're going to want to talk about it. Willingly, I would have said, I don't believe you. But you know what? That's what happens with age. And by the way, what I'll tell you, I have not seen the new Matlock episode yet, but I have seen the premiere of Elsbeth, which I'm only mentioning so that I can, the rule of 3. Scott, you're very familiar with that. We've talked about talk shows twice today, but I get to talk about it the third time because Elsbeth has the benefit of good timing. The first episode of the show, premiering on Sunday, is about a late-night talk show host who is murdered, and his head writer and his sidekick are both under suspicion. The head writer is played by Amy Sedaris, the sidekick is played by Andy Richter, and the talk show host is played by, let me check my notes, Stephen Colbert plays the talk show host. So when we talk about good timing, it's a fun episode. I really enjoyed it. And there's also, for fans of Broadway, there is a really good running gag regarding a very specific deep cut Stephen Sondheim show that they get to do a good meta joke with one of the cast members in the episode. It's a lot of fun. I look forward to writing about the show. It is now, if you used to subscribe to Episodic Medium on Substack, it is no longer on Substack because Substack sucks. It is now on Ghost. Ghost. I'm going to do that every single time I talk about it on the show, and Scott knows I'm not kidding, unfortunately. But the point being, if you haven't subscribed there, please do. And anyway, Scott, where can our listeners find you online?
Well, my primary outlet continues to be Salt Lake City Weekly, where this week I'll be addressing some of the new releases, including Catherine Bigelow's nuclear attack thriller, A House of Dynamite. You can also find me on Blue Sky at Scott Renshaw, and you can find me on Letterboxd at Scott Renshaw. And I'm Scott Renshaw.
And I'm Josh Spiegel, and we'll see you all next time on Mousterpiece Melodies.